helping manufacturers develop energy-efficient technologies for their businesses. That the bill has attracted bipartisan support, Senate Majority Leader Reid says Republicans are attempting to offer non-germane amendments to the bill. Work on the bill is expected to continue next week. And now live to the floor of the U.S. Senate.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. O God, you are our God alone. Early to you we lift our hearts in praise. We look to you today to sustain us, for because of you we live and move and breathe. By your power we find life and joy and peace. Today, help us to focus on your love that can make us messengers of understanding and purveyors of justice to our nation and world. Lord, give to our lawmakers the peace that the world can't give, protecting them from seen and unseen dangers. Encompass them with your strength and meet their every need. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 12, 2013. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Brian Schatz, a Senator from the state of Hawaii, to perform the duties of the Chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Polling leader remarks. There will be an hour of morning business. The majority will control the first half and Republicans the final half. Following that morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1392, the energy savings legislation. So we may have some votes today. We'll work to see if we can come up with some energy-related amendments that we can vote on. Mr. President, America has and has for so many years had the most brilliant and innovative and imaginative scientists in the world. Many of them work hard developing new environmentally friendly energy sources. That's one area that we have just been so good. Every year for the last many years, in August I host an energy summit in Las Vegas. We've had governors and presidents and all kinds of cabinet officers there. It's a bipartisan event. And one of the things we do there is recognize some of the smartest and most creative inventors and investors in the world to show their latest discoveries. There are lots of them all the time. This August I learned about an energy summit. I learned about an American company that's developing high-tech batteries, really great potential. They want to store solar power for use long after the sun goes down. I met the inventor of a flying wind turbine. It looks like a cross between a giant kite and a small plane. And on the Nevada-California border, just a few miles from Las Vegas, there's an amazing thing going on out there. They have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of solar panels, mirrors. And they have 3 very tall towers, look like skyscrapers. And they do it to harness the sun. The reason this work and this invention is so terrific is that one of the problems we found with solar energy, when the sun goes down, it's not producing energy anymore. This will no longer be the case. because in these large, as I said, skyscrapers, they have molten salt stored in this, and it's during the day it heats up. When the sun goes down, it still produces energy. Amazing. And that's 98% completed now. So I'm constantly amazed by the ingenuity of the clean energy industry, which has been a bright spot during the darkest of economic times. But Americans can't just rely on scientists and inventors to solve our energy dilemma and break our own reliance on polluting fossil fuels. We need to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. That will mean reduce our energy consumption at home and at work. That's, Mr. President, what the Shaheen-Portman legislation is all about. Be more efficient. At home, we can start with small choices, replacing a burned-out light bulb with an energy-efficient one, buying more efficient appliances. They're out there. We can do that. Or installing a thermostat that turns the heat down or the air down when you're not at home. It can be regulated remotely. The effect of these choices and many more is real. But we need also to make the buildings we live in and work in, as well as technology inside these buildings, more efficient. What's happened for generations here in America, Mr. President, is that you put a building out, you give it the specs, and people come in and build it as cheaply as they can. No one is concerned about, at the time it's constructed, certainly construction company, they want to get it done quickly and as cheaply as possible. And the insulation is not good. The air conditioning equipment, the appliances in there are not as good as they could be. And so we need to make the buildings we work in, as well as the technology inside these buildings, more efficient. Much of the electricity created in America is wasted. As a boy growing up in rural Nevada like I did, just less than a mile from our home were these massive power lines coming from Boulder Dam, Hoover Dam, going to California, lots of them. And we used to always just be amazed. You could stand under them, you could hear that electricity popping and snapping. That was from Boulder City to LA. Think of all the electricity lost transmitting that electricity down there. So much of electricity that we use in America today is wasted. Just heating and cooling our homes and offices with outdated technology is one way we waste so much electricity. This legislation before the Senate will spur the use of energy efficiency technologies. Here's what Shaheen and Portman named this legislation: the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. That's what it's called. It'll spur the use of energy efficiency technologies in private homes, commercial buildings, as well as in the industrial sector, all at no cost to taxpayers. So I commend Shaheen and Portman for their persistence and dedication in bringing this bill to the floor. I thank Chairman Wyden, Chairman of the full committee, and Ranking Member Murkowski for their able management of this measure. Investing in energy efficiency is one of the fastest and most effective ways to grow our economy. This legislation will make our country more energy independent and protect our environment, but will also save consumers and taxpayers money by lowering their energy bills. This measure, it's estimated, would save American families today $14 billion per year, and it'll create more than 150,000 new jobs, according to some of the studies surrounding this legislation. This bipartisan bill makes it easier for the private sector to adopt efficient technology, and by 2030, that's real close, Mr. President, even as a young man presiding, you understand how quickly 2030 will get here. This legislation will reduce America's CO2 emissions as much as taking nearly 17 million cars off the road. The bill creates incentives for companies to use technology already available right off the shelf, technology that can be used in every state in the nation, and will pay for itself right away through savings in energy. The federal government also has an important role to play in saving energy, and we haven't done very well in the past. Federal government's important since it's the nation's single largest user of consumer electricity. No one is a bigger customer for electricity in America today than the federal government. Reducing the government's energy use will not only be good for the environment, it will save taxpayers lots of money. I am aware that senators wish to offer amendments. I've been told by Senator Shaheen that there's 18 bipartisan amendments to be offered. So I look forward to work with them and with the bill managers to help American businesses and consumers play an active role in reducing our nation's energy consumption. Because while some of the answers to America's energy dilemma will come from inventors and research, others must begin in the place we live and work. Now, Mr. President, a lot of happy talk about what a great piece of legislation this is, and it is. But even though I've worked with Senator Shaheen and Senator Portman, there will be no amendments. We got them all. We got all bipartisan amendments. Of course, we're diverted totally from what this bill is all about. Why? Why, Mr. President? Because the anarchists have taken over. They've taken over the House. Now they're here in the Senate. The Speaker couldn't pass a simple CR today. When asked at a press event yesterday, as I was reported to me on the news today, they said, "What's next?" He said, "You have a couple ideas? Give them to me. They'll be shot down also." We're in a position here where people who don't believe in government, and that's what the Tea Party's all about, are winning. That's a shame. There's not been a single amendment allowed to be offered in this legislation that has anything dealing with energy. Oh, all kinds of different issues. Defund Obamacare. And I guess that's the new, as the fiscal year comes to an end, I guess that's what it's all about. You do what we want to get rid of Obamacare, or we're not going to fund the government. Mr. President, the President of the United States has said he is not going to negotiate dealing with the debt ceiling. If the Republicans in the House can't pass a simple funding resolution for a short time, then it'll shut down because of that. Government can't fund unless we have activity here. So even though I gave all the reason why we need to do this energy bill, and Senator Shaheen and Portman have been talking to me for months and months, let's do this bill. Well, there won't be amendments on it unless they relate to energy. So here we are. Where are we? Where we have been this whole year. And what have we accomplished? Not much, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Republican leader.
I did a lot of listening over the past several weeks at meetings and events all across Kentucky. Last week I participated in my 51st hospital town hall since 2011. And I'll tell you, one theme kept emerging over and over and over. Kentuckians are really worried about Obamacare. They've read the same stories we have about businesses being forced to cut hours and eliminate health care, about people being laid off. They've read about how the rollout of this massive law is becoming a massive mess, and how their personal information could be compromised by scam artists. Now, I know that there's still some of you who supported the law who are thinking, well, they'll learn to like it. But it's precisely the kind of, we know what's good for you attitude that's so upsetting to my constituents. That's what got us into this mess in the first place. So let's at least get this much straight. The doctors, the nurses, the healthcare professionals, the patients, and everyday Kentuckians I've been speaking with on this issue are not ignorant of the facts. They know what they're talking about. A lot of them know more about health care than those who voted for this law ever will. And the fact is, the more my constituents seem to know about Obamacare, the more worried they tend to be. That's true for the business owners, too. One small business owner in Murray wrote to me she's looking at premium increases of nearly 90%. Premium increases of 90%. I think she summed up the situation pretty well. She wrote, "Government is crippling the businesses that are keeping this country going." Another constituent wrote to me to say that as a matter of conscience, he doesn't want to let his employees go uninsured, but that realistically he may no longer have a choice. No longer have a choice. One of Kentucky's biggest employers recently announced plans to stop providing health care to spouses of 15,000 of its employees, also due in part to Obamacare, part of a growing trend across America. These are just some of the human costs of this law, and it hasn't even fully come online yet. So it's small consolation for business owners in my state that they'll have little more time to work through this mess after the President's decision to delay the so-called employer mandate for a year. They got a reprieve for a year. The mess comes along just a year later. Interestingly enough, just yesterday, the country's largest union federation, the AFL-CIO, outlined serious flaws in Obamacare that could hurt its members, too. Apparently, they came very close to calling for outright repeal. This is the AFL-CIO, Mr. President, came this close to calling for outright repeal. News reports suggest that a lot of harsh words were said. I don't think I can even quote all of it out here on the floor. But one union leader implied that Obamacare could lead to the Federation losing three-quarters of its membership in just the next few years. This is the AFL-CIO, the biggest supporter the President had, coming this close to calling for outright repeal. So we know big labor is leaning on the President. We know they want him to let them rewrite the same law they helped ram through, and apparently he's listening to them. But what about everybody else? It's not in big labor. What about the single mom in Bowling Green who won't be able to cover rent and her hours are in fact cut, as she anticipates they will be? What about the recent college graduate in Louisville who's barely scraping by as it is and who won't be able to afford a premium increase? What about the families from Covington to Paducah who are worried sick about this law? Doesn't the administration think those folks deserve some relief too? The same kind of delay, at least, that businesses will get? Well, Republicans do. That's why the Republican-led House of Representatives passed a bill on a bipartisan basis. That means Democrats voted for it too, before the August recess to do just that. Last month, I tried to pass that same bill here in the Senate, but the Washington Democratic leadership blocked it, and I'm not sure why. This legislation is just common sense. It's the fair thing, the right thing to do. So today I'm going to try again. Yesterday, I, along with a number of my colleagues, filed an amendment to the Portman-Shaheen bill that would provide the same reprieve for individuals that the administration has already offered to businesses. This time, I hope my colleagues on the other side will join me in supporting it, as a number of Democrats did over in the House. I know they all got an earful when they were home last month, so maybe they've reconsidered the wisdom and fairness of their earlier position. Maybe now they'll think that individuals and families should be treated no differently than businesses when it comes to protecting them from Obamacare. This same legislation, as I indicated, attracted votes from both Republicans and Democrats in the House, and there's no reason for blocking it here in the Senate. We need to pass a one-year delay. A one-year delay of Obamacare for everyone. That's what the amendment I've filed would do. And then enact what Kentuckians and Americans really need, a full repeal of this job-killing mess of a law. Job-killing mess of a law, that's what it is, and just what I intend to keep fighting for. As I said earlier, union members that push for this bill are now turning against it in droves. So are businesses, and so are our constituents. I don't care what party you're in, you're hearing from them. So let's take this first step together. Let's delay Obamacare mandates for families right now. just like the White House did for businesses, while there's still time to do it. And then let's work together, Democrats and Republicans, to repeal the law for good and replace it with the kind of common sense, step-by-step reforms that will actually lower costs. Actually lower costs. That's what Kentuckians want. That's what Americans want. And anybody who actually listened to their constituents last month already knows what I just said. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the majority controlling the first half. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
When the Senate gavelled in just a couple of moments ago, we heard leader remarks from Majority Leader Harry Reid and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. The pending business in the Senate today is work on an energy efficiency bill co-sponsored by New Hampshire Democrat Jeanne Shaheen and Ohio Republican Rob Portman. They say the bill is the first substantive energy bill to receive consideration on the Senate floor since 2007. This legislation coming to the floor after Harry Reid yesterday set aside any debate on issues dealing with Syria. While this quorum call is underway, we'll go to a House Financial Services Committee hearing earlier this week on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's annual report.
Guidelines that are so stringent based on a worst-case situation that would not be applicable today using good underwriting standards, is that not a concern for you?
It is a concern for me, and I thank you for the question because there's been some confusion around the CoreLogic analysis. They at first indicated that under the way we drew the rule, only half of loans in the market would now be covered. They've since clarified that that is not correct, that in fact, you know, the vast majority of loans will be covered now, very little impact of the rule. But as you say, over time that what we tried to do there, frankly, was to give room for this Congress. We know you're looking at GSE reform. That's a matter for Congress to determine. We had to write a rule for the mortgage market that allowed some flexibility depending on what would happen with that. We tried to make sure that we were covering the market broadly as it is now, and I think everybody's recognized
I'm not time, but please, would you look at that? Because I'm not attacking you, but I'm very concerned on liquidity.
We will continue to monitor this as we go, and as you all perhaps address GSE reform, we will respond and react to that to make sure we don't want to freeze the mortgage market or constrain it.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes gentlelady from New York, Ms. Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cordray, medical debt reporting continues to be a source of consternation for many consumers. The Medical Debt Responsibility Act, which I co-sponsor, will require paid or settled medical debt to be removed from credit reports within 45 days. That bill directly addressed the negative impact such information has on consumers' credit score. With the CFPB now regulating credit bureaus, do you plan to address how medical debt is treated on credit reports?
I thank you for that question, and it's one of many things I've run across at the Bureau that is fairly complicated and not necessarily very helpful to consumers, frankly. So many of us will go to the doctor's office and we'll end up potentially with a bill that's covered by insurance, but there maybe it's all covered, maybe there's a copay, maybe we have to pay something. We may not know when we leave the office exactly how it's going to be handled. And then sometimes that can end up being reported as a debt. We may not even owe it. It may be just a battle among insurance companies. Or it may be that we owe $10 or $20, but it wasn't billed to us immediately. So there's lots of things that end up showing up on people's credit report that they're unaware of that probably are not necessarily correct and that may or may not be justified. So the issue of medical debt is a particularly difficult one. Many of those amounts are very small, but they can loom large in terms of qualifying for a mortgage or something. So I do think it's a fair point that you raise, that it may be a subject for legislative attention and or action. It's something we're looking at the Bureau. It's clear that medical debt is kind of a separate category that is tripping up a lot of Americans, and often in ways that they would not anticipate or understand, and that don't necessarily seem to be appropriate.
Thank you. Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act requires banks and lenders to collect and report credit application data on small businesses, as well as minority and women-owned businesses. Can you elaborate on how collecting this information will help enforce fair lending laws and enable lenders to identify opportunities for improvement in underserved communities?
Yes, and there's a couple different issues there. First of all, I think the logic of what Congress did in Dodd-Frank makes a great deal of sense. My understanding is that there was some efforts to collect this data, maybe by the Fed at one time. They had a survey that was discontinued at some point. This Congress obviously expressed its will that that data, which is important, can shed light on lending patterns, needs to be developed. It was determined to create a provision in the Act that puts some responsibility on us to take this up. We're trying to work, we want to work with the Small Business Administration, who obviously are much more knowledgeable in the area than we are. There's also been some talk and efforts among some other departments in terms of how to work on this. We're trying to, first of all, figure out how's the best way to proceed. The second thing I want to point out is we are going to be undertaking, and we've indicated now, the HMDA data, which has been very valuable but is in need of an update. Everybody pretty much agrees. Congress also addressed that, and we're going to be undertaking new rules to govern HMDA data. And out of that, we expect we're going to learn a lot that relates to the small business data collection, and there may be some overlap there operationally as well. So we're underway. We're thinking about this. We understand the importance of it and why you are looking for it. It is not necessarily in our immediate comfort zone because we deal with consumers typically, and it's about the only area where we've given any responsibility in business. We want to work with others to make sure that can be done properly and appropriately.
So when can we expect the CFPB to publish rules implementing that section?
I can't give you a date in terms of when we will publish rules. I can give you the assurance that as of this fall, we're underway with thinking about how to staff that, how to work with the other agencies, how it intersects with the HMDA update, which is extremely important and that we're underway with immediately, and that there may be things there that end up, some of the data can be jointly collected, which would obviously be efficient. So,
regarding the remittance transfers providers, last year the Bureau published a rule, and critics took exception with the rule for potentially increasing the cost on small banks and credit unions. What changes did the CFPB make to the final rule, and when that is supposed to take effect next month?
So which rule are we talking about?
the one that requires remittance transfer providers to provide senders with certain disclosures.
I'm afraid the time of the gentlelady has expired.
I'll be happy to either follow up or address it.
Sure.
If the Director could
Yeah.
add that to the list of answers to submit in writing, please.
Thank
The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, the Chairman Emeritus of the committee, Mr. Bacchus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cordray, I sent you a letter on indirect auto lending, and you responded to that letter. In fact, 35 of my fellow members on this committee joined that letter. Your response, in my opinion, was very general, so I just wanted to alert you. I'll be sending a follow-up letter, and I'd like for the agency as soon as possible to give me a more detailed response.
Look forward to getting that.
Thank you. Director, Section 1022 of Dodd-Frank says the Bureau may not use its authorities under this paragraph, and that's to obtain records from other agencies and other individuals for purposes of gathering or analyzing the personally identifiable financial information of consumers. You're aware of that section, are you not?
I am, yes.
Is the agency collecting personally identifiable financial information of individual consumers?
Yeah. So I want to address this kind of carefully and comprehensively. There are different provisions in our statute about gathering information needed to do our work that Congress expects us to do and carry out our responsibilities. If we have no information, we can't carry out the responsibilities. That's pretty clear. Section 1022 is referring to efforts we might undertake to monitor markets in order to be able to understand patterns and trends.
And getting information from other agencies that might have personal information in it.
Well, so if we undertake to gather that information to monitor the market, we are required to proceed by either rule or order. We had not, until very recently, proceeded under 1022 at all. We did just now send out an order to a number of companies to provide us with template consumer credit agreements as part of our efforts on the arbitration study. But there are other areas where we are permitted to collect information, and it's obviously necessary. The consumer complaint function, again, is one where we get personally identifiable information.
You're aware back on May 11th of last year, your agency approached the U.S. trustees program and asked them to make a request before the Federal District Court in Tampa, Florida, for 5 million bankruptcy files.
So we don't typically comment on the details of enforcement matters. I understand other parties feel free to comment, and apparently do feel free to comment on those. We're working with a number of different agencies, including the Justice Department, to carry out our responsibilities, and we will try to do that appropriately.
You may not want to comment, but those 5 million files have all sorts of personal information in them. And, you know, let me ask you this. If you did that, hypothetically, and you were to receive or personal, financial, or private information on U.S. citizens from the U.S. trustees programs that came from the files of attorneys, would that not violate the Act?
First of all, no. And second, let me be
it would not.
Let me be straightforward about this, and let me give you a related example. We had enforcement actions against a number of credit card companies.
No, let's just use that example.
No, I'm just saying we had to make restitution to millions of consumers. We had to have information about those consumers in order to
Director,
do that.
If you requested that the U.S. Trustee's Office file an action or request the files of every bankruptcy file in this country, would that not violate the Act?
First of all, there's some garbling going on in the facts there, not on your part, but on those who are trying to report the facts. That's
I'm just saying, would it violate the charge of the specific limitation?
And you are aware that you have been walled off from obtaining, from interfering with the practice of law or intervening in the judicial process. Let me just say this. You have, that is a data mining and a data collecting process that you request the U.S. Trustees Department to do without the knowledge or consent of citizens of the United States. Now, is that true or not? You can answer yes or no, or you can say you can't talk about it.
No, I think it's a general principle that when we have an enforcement action and we're trying to figure out
the gentleman could give
what
a brief
harm
answer.
The consumers, we need to understand individual consumer harm, and we will do that. We need to do that in order to be effective.
The time,
There's a number of people around the country who are purporting to be
I'm not talking
helping
about effective,
consumers,
but do you
they're
have
not.
legal the time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Director Cordray. I just have two quick questions, and I'll leave all the rest of the time for you to answer, and if that's not enough time, then maybe you can answer in writing. There seems to be a proliferation of online payday lending. Seems to be able to evade state laws governing payday lending. I'm interested in knowing now that the CFPB has the ability to regulate payday lending, what options you're exploring in this arena and what is your timetable for doing so. Second, a couple of my constituents, bank constituents, have raised questions about a recent rule that requires them to issue separate statements for bank accounts and loan accounts on the theory that that requires them to duplicate mailing cost and drives up the cost of the regulation. I'm wondering whether you have the ability to go back and take a look at that or provide information to me that justifies why that requirement is necessary. Particularly small and community banks and credit unions are concerned that that extra cost of mailing, in much the same way as the privacy cost of mailing privacy policies, is just an onerous cost. So if you could address those in the 3 minutes that I have remaining, and if you need additional time, you can submit in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Watt. A number of your friends in North Carolina said hello yesterday when I was down there. Wanted me to pass that on to you. On the second point, I don't know that I'm familiar with the question you're raising. It's not a concern that I recall hearing, that there's some sort of duplication in terms of bank accounts and loan accounts and extra costs of mailing. But I'd be very interested to hear about it. We'll follow up with you if there are.
They've indicated to me it's a recent rule, so okay, maybe that's the question you want to get back to me on
maybe,
separately.
Or maybe it's a proposal or something. We'll get back. We certainly wouldn't want that to be the result, and I would agree with you on that. On your first question, which is a very good question and very active topic right now, the issue of online payday lending. You know, online payday lending is interesting because, first of all, much brick-and-mortar payday lending is migrating to the Internet now. It's estimated that the majority of payday lending will have gone to the Internet in the next several years. And what often happens is that can create problems in states where there is a usury cap, as there is, as you know, in North Carolina and in, I think, 13 states. So if a loan is being made into that state above the rate of interest that can be charged legally in that state, that is problematic. If a loan is being made into that state by someone from the Internet who is not licensed to provide a loan in that state, that also can be problematic. These are issues that obviously require us to coordinate and cooperate with different state authorities, both banking regulators and also attorneys general. met with Attorney General Roy Cooper yesterday in North Carolina. He's very concerned about this issue. And it also requires us to coordinate with the prudential regulators. And as you've seen, there's been some activity now about trying to understand some of these online lenders, what their relationship is with banking institutions, because typically they can only operate if there's both a transmission mechanism and a collection mechanism with the financial entities, and that can be problematic. And it's a subject of some considerable scrutiny right now by us and by others. So I wouldn't say more than that right now, but we're mindful of the fact, I go back to my experience as Attorney General in Ohio, Internet practices can be very difficult for law enforcement authorities at the state level because they're borderless, they go beyond jurisdictions, they go beyond the national jurisdiction as well. So
you anticipate CFPB having some rules issued at some point in this area?
I think at the moment it's an issue that we see as a potential issue for enforcement and supervision. Perhaps rules. We're looking at the payday and small dollar lending industry. I think that's known. We've indicated that in our unified regulatory agenda. These are things that we're looking at because they're hard problems. I've seen them at the state level. I know their frustrations. I work with the Attorney Generals constantly, and we want to make sure that we all can be effective together.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The Chair now recognizes the Chairman of our Capital Markets Subcommittee, gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Director, when a senior government official comes before a hearing of Congress and fails to answer questions in a timely manner, I believe in the minds of the American public there is an appearance of impropriety by that individual and by his agency as well. When that same agency is responsible for secretly looking into the private papers of an American public as well, I think that raises even to a higher level. Let me understand your testimony then. Your testimony is that you were well aware of these questions that were asked of your second-in-command at your agency back on July 9th, and yet over a month went by, all the way to your testimony August 12th, and you still had not answered any of those questions, and the excuse that you give to Congress today is that more questions came in after that fact.
No. No, that's not my testimony, if you want me to restate it.
So can you explain why you did not answer in the first 5 weeks after July 9th?
So on July 9th was the testimony. There were just a few questions submitted.
Correct.
And there were multiples of that then submitted on August 12th. So it took
Can you explain why you did not answer in the first 5 weeks?
No. It took the committee a month to formulate the vast majority of the questions. It's a huge amount of information.
Can you explain why you did not answer those basic questions in the first 5 weeks?
Okay. There were a few questions submitted to us. We would have had an easy time answering those. At the same time,
Can you explain why you did not do what you just said is easy then?
I'd like to respond to your question if you'd like to give me a chance to respond. Would you like to give me a chance to respond?
So far, you've not answered why you did not answer in the first 5 weeks.
There were a few questions submitted that we could have answered easily in a time frame. As we were working on those, a vast number, almost 200 questions were further submitted.
How many?
That intersect with the other questions and affect the answers, all right? And they involve gathering contracts and other things. It took this committee more than a month to formulate the questions. We've had less than a month now to respond to them, but we will have responses to you in a matter of days.
So you still have not answered the basic question. We gave you a number of questions. As you said, they were easy to answer, and yet in 5 weeks you could not answer those questions. Here's, for example,
that's not my testimony, but if you want me to answer
testimony
further,
is that your testimony a moment ago was that some of those questions, to quote you just now, was some of those questions would have been easy to answer.
Had they not been followed by a vast number of questions that intersect with them and affect the answers
and need to be
responded
responded
to.
The week after of July 9th that there was subsequent questions coming?
Beg your pardon?
Did you know on July 10th, 11th, and 12th that other questions were coming?
Our staff has had regular contact with your staffs to understand. We're very responsive to questions for the record. We always respond. My understanding, by the way, I would add, I'm supposed to be back here, the chairman has indicated, to testify again next month. So you'll have plenty of opportunity with me on these. But we've received over 200 questions for the record. We've taken less time to respond than the committee took to formulate the questions, and we will have the answers in days.
Here's a question. Will you commit to sending us all the contracts to engage with third-party vendors? Yes, we're happy to provide that contract information. It's 2 months later. You haven't provided that.
They are being provided in response to
Another
the
question.
QFR.
Do you have agreements with any foreign countries? I can verify that for you, for Congressman. You haven't provided that answer. We can go through. These are what you just said were the easy questions, and you said you couldn't answer them because you were waiting for the other ones.
If you'd like,
Mr. Director,
we don't have any agreements with foreign countries. Mr. Antonakis testified that at the hearing.
No,
that is the answer. So there is nothing.
Sorry,
to
no,
provide.
he did not. You said you read
He
the
did, in
transcript.
fact.
I'll verify that for you.
That's fine, but that is the answer. So,
Okay.
But look, we're going to have the answers to you in days. It's an immense amount of information you will see. Our staff has been working incredibly hard, and they've been communicating back and forth with your staffs on it. You'll have a crack at me next month. I'll be happy to answer your questions at that point.
So
there's no intention here to be unresponsive. I take the oversight responsibilities of this committee and of our Bureau very seriously, and I think that's been our track record, and we will continue to try to establish that track record. I want to satisfy you on this point.
Well, obviously, you haven't satisfied
I know
today.
I haven't yet.
One of the other questions, I mean, I will submit my questions to you because I'm not going to get into them in 35. Mine are basic questions. Okay. Can I have your commitment? I can have some answers to you answers from you by the beginning of next week.
We will take all the questions for the record that are submitted. If there's a lot, it will take us a little while to respond to them. If there's a few, it will take us
How
less
many
time.
U.S. consumer accounts is the CFPB monitoring in its data collection? Basic question.
Okay. So there's several pieces to the answer. You know, I'm sorry it's a complicated answer, but it is. We have our consumer response function, where there's over 200,000 consumers who have submitted information to us, and that's one basket. There is our supervision program, which deals with the 110 largest financial institutions in the country who have extensive customer base across this country that we deal with all the time.
When will
The third is our market monitoring.
When can we expect answers to these questions?
The QFRs that you all submitted, approximately 200, and you will see that it is pages and pages of voluminous answers and documentation.
The time
will be within days.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cordray, let me first thank you for your cooperation in working with this committee and getting us information and being willing to extend your staff to come to anything that we ask and, we ask you to, as you, in response to Ranking Member Waters, when she asked to have staff available to ask questions dealing with the QM rule or anything else, you were more than willing to say that whatever you need, not only on this side of the aisle, but both sides of the aisle, and whether people are not on the committee. So I just want to thank you for your cooperation with this Congress in that manner, being open and transparent about it. I think that's tremendously important and something that we need to get done. And so, and clearly, for the American people, I want to thank your agency again. More than over 6 million consumers have received refunds since you've been in. Over 200,000 consumer complaints have been recorded. And there's been several rules and guidelines issued that affect millions of American and consumer protection rights, which we didn't have. So it's been a real service, I think, to the American people, and I want to thank you and your agency for what you're doing in that regards. And I also, in your answer, you talked and you referred to, and one of the questions to your own personal life with your mother when you answered the question of the gentlelady from New York. I often do the same thing when I think about credit and look at my family who lived in public housing and didn't have many resources and therefore had to try to get, banking, institutional banking. Sometimes they were denied and try to figure out other ways in which they can make a living without going to loan shark to others. And so to that end, again, I applaud you for showing leadership on the issue, which, I think you had a release in June of final rules to establish procedures to cover non-banks who are lending money under your supervisory authority, including those that may, payday loans, etc. So I was wondering, first, could you comment on the study that the CFPB has been undertaking to bring clearer supervision to the industry? And have you looked at what some of the borrowing or analyzed some of the borrowing activity by the consumers that Mr. Watt was talking about that are using online payday loans? Because we're trying to figure out how they can have access to credit also, but not be abused, and and how the CFPB could be involved there. And lastly, and then I'll just be quiet and let you answer the questions. I've had a conversation with some banks yesterday, asking them, well, why won't they compete in this market? And they said that they would like to, and they were complimentary of you, but they said that they thought that there was some conflict at times between your rulings and some of the jurisdictions between either the FDIC or the OCC that seems to be conflicting, and so they're not clear, but they would like to be under, clearly, the rulings that with dealing with consumers under the CFPB. So could you give me some responses in that regard?
Okay. Actually, I'm intrigued by your last point because I'd be glad to hear more about that. I do think that many financial institutions could make small dollar loans cheaply. They would have very little cost in doing so. A lot of credit unions have done this, and that would be helpful to provide more of that kind of credit to people who need it and potentially could avoid some of the higher cost cycles of indebtedness that they get into. I want to go back a couple comments. First, the point you made about thinking about your own family.
I'd like to come to the floor today to talk about a new CNN poll that came out yesterday that talked about the President's health care law. It says support for the President's health care law.
We are in a quorum call.
Mr. President, the Senator from Wyoming requests that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to talk about a new CNN poll. And the CNN poll came out yesterday that said that support for the President's health care law appears to be waning. Appears to be waning. The CNN polling director, Keating Holland, talks about this. He says that support has dropped in virtually all demographic categories, but it has fallen the farthest among two core Democratic groups, women and Americans who make less than $50,000 a year. He goes on to quote him, says, those are also the two groups, he says, that are most likely to pay attention to health insurance issues and possibly the ones most likely to be affected by any changes. He says that may be particularly true for lower-income Americans who are most likely to have part-time jobs, be on Medicaid, or not currently have health insurance, and thus be the first to have to navigate the new system. So there's the story from CNN polling yesterday. Support for the President's health care law appears to be waning. Well, Mr. President, I spent a lot of time, as you have over the last month, traveling around our home states, listening to our constituents, hearing what's on people's mind, and that's what I did back in Wyoming over the last month. I do it every weekend, meet with lots of people. We've had lots of county fairs and rodeos, town hall gatherings, and one thing that came up just about everywhere I went was the concern that so many folks still have about the President's health care law. Some are confused, many are upset, and many more are angry. Angry that the law is doing serious damage to middle-class jobs and to people's paychecks. And even the insurance coverage that many people already had and liked are things that they're going to lose. Republicans have warned from the beginning that the President's law created too much red tape, too many new taxes, new fees, and expensive mandates. And as a result, people were going to end up paying a lot more for health insurance. Well, for months now, Americans have been seeing exactly that. One of the latest numbers that really stuck out was from Delta Airlines. They say they're going to be paying about $100 million more to cover their employees next year. All of the mandates in the health care law, the President has said so many of these are free. They're not free. Somebody's got to pay for them. Just covering workers' children's up until age 26, and it's about 8,000 young people covered by Delta Airlines added to their policy. That's going to cost them an extra $14 million next year. So remember, the President said health care costs were supposed to go down, not up. He also said that for 85 to 90% of Americans who already have health insurance, the only impact, he said, of the law was that their insurance is better than it's ever been before. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case, Mr. President. All you need to do is pull out today's New York Times business section, first page, B1, above the fold, unions' misgivings on health law burst into view. Labor delegates level criticism at Congress and the President. It seems that the President's promises to people who believed him that they could keep what they have if they like it. They're now saying, Mr. President, something has to change here. You know, you haven't leveled with us. What we're seeing now coming out of this administration is not what you promised it. And it's not just the New York Times. Today's Investors Business Daily, above the fold, first page, Obamacare hitting union members, and they're upset. Unionized part-timers losing health insurance, full-timers losing hours. That's not what the president promised. What this means is people are not just losing their health care, their insurance, it's affecting their jobs and it's affecting their paychecks. Now, another step that some employers have had to take is to drop coverage for spouses who can get their insurance elsewhere. The president said that wasn't going to happen. He said if you like the insurance you have, you'll be able to keep it. But once again, the president has failed to see how much harm his health care law would do to middle-class Americans. Those hardworking people are now paying the price. A recent memo to employees of the shipping company, UPS, said that it plans to exclude 15,000 spouses from its insurance plan. They cited the health care law as the top reason for the switch. But, Mr. President, it's not just businesses. The University of Virginia recently announced plans to drop spousal coverage for some of its employees, too. The president is berating colleges about the cost of tuition, but yet his own mandates are making it more expensive for colleges to provide insurance for members of their faculty. So, of course, they pass those costs on to the students. The school said that the president's health care law would add $7.3 million to the cost of its health plan in 2014. So, just like the UPS, if a worker's husband or wife can get insurance from their own employer, the University of Virginia won't be covering them anymore, even if it's insurance that they have and they liked. The president said they could keep it. The school directly laid some of the blame on the health care law. It's not something the president admitted might happen, and it's not something that he's eager to talk about now. He's also not eager to talk about his promise to cut the price people pay for insurance. President Obama promised that by the end of his first term he would lower people's premiums by $2,500 per family per year. Now, Mr. President, he didn't just say this once. He said it over and over again at least 19 times. He didn't misspeak. It was a practiced line, an intentional part of his stump speech. He didn't say that premiums would go down if Congress passes a perfect law that takes effect the first day of his office. No, no. He didn't tell the audience it would be $2,500 less than the projected rate of growth that someone estimated that we would have otherwise. He chose to ignore all of that, to leave out every caveat that he could have included. He said $2,500 less by the end of his first term, period. Every person, every audience knew what the president was promising. Well, now we know that President Obama broke that promise like so many others, and he and his supporters should stop trying to explain it away and just admit that they failed. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, the average family premium has soared by almost $3,000 since President Obama took office. Now, that's not a prediction about what will happen over the next 4 years. It is a simple, indisputable fact about how much more people are already paying. So you've got people who are losing their insurance plans that the president's health care law taxes too heavily. You've got other people losing the insurance that they have now because employers are dropping coverage for spouses. You've got some people who will keep their insurance, but they're going to have a lot less money in their paycheck because costs are going up thanks to the health care law. And you have a lot of people that the president's health care law is really hitting in the wallet. It's because we're continuing to see towns and counties and school districts having to cut back the hours of their workers. They need to keep more employees at a part-time status in order to reduce the burdens and the expenses of the health care law. Over the past month, even more places have had to take these steps. Middleton Township in New Jersey said that they would cut the hours of 25 people. County in Texas said it would do the same. Another county in Florida figured it would cost them more than $1 million to cover all of their part-time workers under the health care law. So they're already reducing the hours for some of these people, and they're planning to make additional cuts. Now the Obama administration is brushing off these reports. They're saying it's only anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal? Mr. President, these aren't anecdotes. These are people's jobs. And one of the analysis out there found that 258 different employers have cut work hours, cut jobs, or taken other steps to avoid Obamacare costs. 258 employers across the country, many of them school districts, counties, communities, some private businesses, and more are coming forward every day. They're limiting the hours they can pay bus drivers, librarians, coaches, substitute teachers, and middle-class workers. The Obama administration says everything is fine because some of these workers will get a subsidy to help buy their expensive insurance. Well, the people that I talk to aren't looking for subsidies, Mr. President. They're looking for a job. They're looking for more hours. They're looking for ability to take home a paycheck comparable to the paycheck that they may have had last year, but is going down because their hours have been cut. They want the Obama administration to stop making it so tough for them to find full-time work. They want to go back to the insurance that they had before the President's health care law went into effect. Instead, they're getting more bad news, more signs that the health care law is a train wreck that's going to hurt the middle class even more. We all knew that the health care system in this country had problems and needed to be fixed. Costs were rising year after year. Too many people were having trouble getting the care they needed. Democrats could have sat down with Republicans to write a law to help those people. Instead, President Obama and Democrats in Congress, who are in charge of the House and the Senate, passed their plan, a one-sided plan, a plan that today is failing the American people. They did it without Republican support, and they did it without seriously considering our ideas. Washington Democrats promised the kind of reform, but the reform they promised is not what they delivered. That's not what's in this 2,800-page health care law with over 100,000 pages of regulations, hard for anyone to understand or comply with. Republicans have voted to repeal this failed law and to start over with reforms that solve the biggest problems that families face today. We're going to keep trying to get that done, Mr. President. If Democrats are serious about helping middle-class Americans, they will join us. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will